All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the March 5th, 2024 Technical Committee meeting for the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board. Rebecca, can we start the roll call? And please turn on your camera if you can, or if you so desire, to let everybody know who you are. Thank you.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
City of Annapolis,
Present.
Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City,
Present.
Baltimore County,
Here.
Carroll County. Here. Harford County.
Good morning, Harford County's here.
Thank you. Howard County,
Howard County's here.
Queen Anne's County,
Here.
MDOT,
Here.
MDE,
Here.
MDP,
Here.
MDOT MTA,
Present.
MDOT SHA.
State Highways here.
Thank you. And just to circle back, Anne Arundel County.
He's here.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There he is. Hey, Brian. All right, so we'll go for approval of February minutes. And I imagine everybody's had a chance to look at those minutes. So can I please have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Howard County moves.
And Queen Anne's County will second.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, can I please have Rebecca start the roll call then for approval of the minutes?
Annapolis,
Aye.
Anne Arundel County,
Aye.
Baltimore City,
Aye.
Baltimore County,
Aye.
Carroll County,
Aye.
Harford County,
Aye.
Howard County. I'm sorry, Howard County.
Aye. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Thanks. Queen Anne's County
Aye.
and MDOT.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, the minutes are approved. We'll now move on to action items. With this resolution, the first resolution, we have a recommended action on resolution 2417 is to consider an amendment to the 2024 TIP for the I-70 MD32 to I-695 Transportation Systems Management Operations, or TSMO project. I'll ask Mr. Keith Kuchart to begin the presentation, and then we'll turn it over to SHA. I believe Ben might be presenting on this. Ben? Okay, I'll turn it over to Keith.
All right. Thank you, Dan, and good morning, everybody. As Dan mentioned, in resolution 24-17, MDOT SHA is requesting to amend the 2024 to 2027 TIP for the I-70 Maryland 32 to I-695 project. And this project was formerly known as the TSMO System 1 project. This amendment will reduce the scope of work and concentrate only on the I-70 corridor. And this amendment will also be presented to the ICG at tomorrow's ICG meeting to determine the project's conformity status. And I think Mr. Tavon Hawkins will be the one that's presenting this project. Tavon?
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Tavon Hawkins from the Office of Planning and Preliminary Engineering with the State Highway Administration. I'm the Regional Plan Administrator for D5 and D7, and I will be presenting the I-70 MD32 to 695 project. So this project, this is the first amendment, I-70, I-695 project. This is this project is third in Howard County's priority letter. In addition, this project was named in the TIP in previous years as TISMO System 1, which included US 29 and the US 40 corridor. However, US 29 and US 40 breakouts are proceeding as separate district projects. Next slide. The I-70 Maryland 32 to 695 project will incorporate intelligent transportation systems and geographic improvements to address safety and operations along the corridor. Next slide. So we are requesting 3.5 million in design funds, which is anticipated to begin in spring of 2024 and extend through summer of 2028. We're also requesting the removal of 0.2 million in right-of-way funds and 36 million in construction funds. The change in scope and schedule are both reflected in this proposed amendment. Next, I'd like to pass it on to Ben to talk about the NEVI.
Hold on, excuse me, I
Well,
think we
yeah.
need to address this as resolution 24-17, please.
Yeah. Tavon, thanks a lot for the presentation. If that is it, then we'll look for a member to move for approval of resolution 24-17 and then a second. Can I have a member make a motion to approve in a second, please?
Annapolis moved.
Okay.
Baltimore City seconds.
All right, that was pretty clear. Now we want to ask if there are any members of the public that have any questions or comments on the resolution, and if so, please indicate you would like to comment in the chat box. And Todd's going to check and see if we have anybody in the chat box.
Mr. Chair, currently there's no one requesting to speak in the chat box.
All right, thank you, Todd. We'll now vote on the resolution to consider the I-70 MD32 to I-695 TSMO project. When your name.
Hey, Dan, this is David here. I didn't hear you guys offer the opportunity for technical members to ask questions. Did I miss that?
You missed that.
I'm sorry.
If I didn't say it, of course, does any technical committee member first have any questions or comments?
I was waiting for you to say that. I was like, I have a couple questions.
Doesn't happen that often, but yeah, so I appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, no problem. Hey, so yeah, so I think it would be helpful get some clarification what's happening with that $36 million in construction funding, in terms of where it's going to end up at this point. Is it going to get pushed forward in time? Can we get that information from MDOT? And the other piece of information I think would be helpful is those breakout projects that within the district. Can we get updates, and like it'd be good to know before the final vote with the BRTB on the status of that, because then I can talk to our folks here.
Okay.
Is that something SHA and MDOT can provide?
Well, it sounds like then this sounds like the kind of questions that might delay the vote. If we can do this in April. I know you had some questions that you were asking last week on this, and I didn't know if you got them answered or not in full, but it sounds like you didn't. And I don't know if Tavon, if you guys are able to handle that question, or do we need to go back to our project engineers and talk about the scope of this project and maybe discuss it. I'm not trying to hold it up, but I don't know if we can answer your question here. And you're suggesting holding it until we can get those questions answered.
Or a commitment to get those questions answered before the final vote.
Yeah, okay, so the question's out there. Tavon, Ben, I don't know if you guys can take a stab at that, or if you want to clarify.
Dan, this is Ben Allen here. I'm getting feedback, by the way. Can you guys hear me okay?
Hold on, let me turn my mic off.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay. So with respect to the construction funding, the message here is that the project construction funding is deferred. So obviously the project is moving forward with design, which is going to take a number of years. And so it's not going on hold, of course. And the hope is that once design is completed, construction funding would have been identified at that time, and that there will be a seamless transition from design to construction. Of course, we don't have that right now. So like construction, it is not funded for construction at current, but the message here is that construction funding is deferred.
Okay.
Now with respect to the other breakout projects on US 40 and US 29, as we said, those projects are becoming breakout projects that are being pursued by the district. Those are currently not, like, there's nothing being done about those. Like, obviously, we're focusing on the I-70 corridor right now. There are no projects associated with the other corridors at this time. Of course, there might be additional actions necessary once those projects are pursued. But we don't know anything about like the scope of those projects. Are they going to be major corridor projects or more focused, smaller system preservation type projects? That's unknown at this time. And so what I can tell you is that we will pursue additional actions as needed once those projects become a reality and they move forward. But right now, the only thing that we know is moving forward is the I-70 project, and specifically the design of it.
Gotcha. Okay, I think that's helpful. Yeah, so that's it. My questions. Thanks for that information. I think I'm okay with moving forward.
Sure.
From my side, anyway.
All right.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, sir. All right. Does any other technical committee members have any questions or comments on this resolution?
Hey, Dan, it's Sam Kale in Harford County. I guess two questions. Ben, you mentioned the funding's deferred. Sorry, not to sound thick here, but does that mean it's getting repurposed into other projects? It's not getting earmarked for this, right? So it's that 36 million that was planned is going to be used, I assume, on other projects in the more immediate future.
I mean, obviously this was directly related to the funding, shortfalls that we faced back in the fall and winter timeframe. So unclear where that 36 million is going at this point, or if it's going anywhere for that matter.
Okay.
But it's just not available at this time.
Okay. And then the other question I had, just to make sure I'm clear, is there was a TSMO project, or there is a TSMO project along I-695, right? I think from 43 to 70. That's a different TSMO system, correct? That's not
correct?
That's not wrapped into this. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Now, obviously, this project is directly adjacent to the I-70 695 triple bridges,
Right.
The design build effort that's currently in design. So obviously, there's going to be close coordination with that effort, but they're all interrelated, but separate efforts.
Sure. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
All right. Sounds like two counties affected. Here's a couple questions. Any other technical committee members have any questions? All right, we'll go back and see if there's any members of the public that have any questions or comments in this resolution. Todd, has anybody chimed in on the chat box during this?
Mr. Chair, currently there is still no one requesting to speak in the chat box.
All right, thank you, Todd. Okay, so we'll now vote on the resolution to consider the I-70 MD-32 to I-695 TSMO project. When your name is read, indicate aye or nay. Rebecca, can you read down the list of members, please?
Sure. Annapolis,
Aye.
Anne Arundel County,
Aye.
Baltimore City,
Aye.
Baltimore County.
Aye.
Thank you. Carroll County,
Aye.
Harford County,
Aye.
Howard County,
Aye.
Queen Anne's County,
Aye.
and MDOT.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, this amendment has been approved. Let's move to the BRTB for consideration. Okay, we're going to move on to action item number 3. We have a recommended action on resolution 2418. This resolution will add a new project to the TIP, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure or NEVI funds. And Mr. Keith Kucharik will begin the presentation and then turn it over to State Highway Administration. Keith?
Yep, thanks again, Dan. And as Dan mentioned, in resolution 24-18, MDOT SHA is requesting to amend the 2024 to 2027 TIP to add one new project, and that's the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure or NEVI project. This amendment will add $22.316 million in NEVI funds, STBG funds, and private contractor funds. This amendment will also be presented at the ICG meeting tomorrow to determine this project's conformity status. And this one will be presented by Mr. Benjamin Allen. So Ben, take over.
Good morning, guys. So as Keith said, this is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which is a new federal statewide program that will create vehicle charging stations along Maryland's designated alternatives fuel corridors and within communities along public roads or public accessible locations. This program will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and will put Maryland on the path towards net zero emissions and will improve the mobility of passenger and commercial electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So this amendment requests $0.9 million in design funds, which includes a breakdown of 80% NEVI funds, 15% STBG funds that are going to be converted via toll credits, and 5% state matching funds. The design is anticipated to begin in early spring 2024 and will extend through spring 2026. This amendment also requests $21.4 million in construction funds, which includes a breakdown of 80% NEVI funds and then 20% private funds through the contractor. Construction is anticipated to begin in fall 2024 and will extend through fall 2030. This amendment includes BRTB's portion of the statewide $62.8 million program, which will amount to about 37% of the total program. Specific locations have not yet been determined, and additional actions may be necessary as design progresses. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben. So we'll now ask that a member move for approval of resolution 2418 and then a second.
Baltimore City moves.
Baltimore County seconds.
All right, thank you very much. Do any technical committee members have any questions or comments on this resolution?
Hi, Dan. It's Steve Cahoon with Queen Anne's County. I just had a quick question on how many charging stations do you anticipate that this will fund? I mean, what's the expectation?
Well, when we originally, I know I can speak a little bit to that because I was managing the planning of it the first 2 years when we originally did this. And if you look at our mapping on it, we figured we could probably fund about 45 of these DC fast chargers with 4 charge ports continuously at 150 kilowatt. So, you know, but that is going to, it's going to depend on what kind of applications the state gets in from these private entities who are going for the funds and where they're located and how much each project costs and the timeline. You know, so many factors at play. So I can put you in touch with our NEVI team directly, and they can talk, you know, about locations in your county, obviously, or anybody else's county. But I hope that answers it a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
I think they had I forget what the average cost that we put in. We thought it was around 600,000 throughout that time, that process time of just doing the planning. That's about how much it was cost for each charging station. Do we have any other questions from any other technical committee members? If not, we'll ask if any members of the public have any questions or comments on the resolution. If so, please indicate you would like to comment in the chat box. Todd, do we have anybody in the chat box?
Mr. Chair, currently there is no one requesting to speak in the chat box.
Thank you, Todd. Okay, we'll now vote on moving the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Amendment to the BRTB. When your name is read, please indicate aye or nay. Rebecca, could you please read down the list of members?
Annapolis,
Aye.
Anne Arundel County,
Aye.
Baltimore City,
Aye.
Baltimore County,
Aye.
Carroll County. Aye. Harford County,
Aye.
Howard County,
Aye.
Queen Anne's County,
Aye.
and MDOT.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, the amendment has been approved to move to the BRTB for consideration. We'll go on to item number 4 today, which is a presentation about the MTA Adaption and Resiliency Toolbox. And we originally had Lauren Molesworth and Jennifer Martin going to present it. I know, Jennifer, you're here.
Yes, I am. I'm loading up the presentation now. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Jen.
Okay, just bear with me one moment. Okay, can everybody see the presentation?
Looks like it's loading.
One second. If not, we can use the PDF that we shared yesterday. I can just speak off that if that's easier.
Okay.
If you
1
mind
second,
sharing that.
and I will load.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Just 1 second.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Martin. I'm with the Maryland Transit Administration. I'm the Co-Resilient Transportation Program Manager for the agency. There's 2 of us that work at MTA to further resiliency at MTA. We often work in tandem with sustainability at MTA as well. So we have a lot of nexus between sustainability and resiliency. And one effort that came out of this was creating a toolbox of all of the efforts we have done to date. And that's what I'm here today to share with you, the toolbox that we created, and explain that this toolbox was created for MTA and for MTA's assets. But the original inception of the toolbox was to create one that is repeatable. MTA is one modal administration of MDOT. So when we went into this, we wanted to create something that could be utilized or recreated at other modal administrations at MDOT and also local county governments. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of overview of MTA. We're one of the largest multimodal transit systems in the US. And what makes us unique here, and this factors into the development of the toolbox, is MTA has we have many modes that are within MTA. So we have local buses, commuter buses, light rail link, Metro, MARC, paratransit that spans the entire state of Maryland. So when nailing down or starting to look at adaptation for our vulnerable assets at MTA, we have to look at a wide range of asset types, right? So it's not just limited to pavement or parking lots. We have track, rail, traction control, all sorts of systems that go into the MTA modal administrations. And we factored all of that into the toolbox. So the vision of the Resilient Transportation Program is to manage increased climate risk by evaluating MTA's climate vulnerability, increasing our adaptive capacity of our assets, and implementing priority strategies through effective and equitable program, project, and purchasing decisions. So as I mentioned a minute ago, we are trying to create a sustainable and resilient MTA, and following the principles of sustainability and weaving in resiliency of environmental health, economic growth, and quality of life. Next slide. In 2019, MTA had an updated vulnerability assessment completed. A lot of times that information contained within a vulnerability assessment can either just end up living in that report or in some situations die on the vine. So we wanted to move beyond just the identification process. We know what assets are vulnerable, but what do we do with that information? What's the next steps? How do we take this into something actionable? So what we did was we created a centralized hub for all of our resiliency planning resources, data, and projects. It's an online tool. I'll show some screenshots of it in a moment. It also ensures legacy and succession planning measures. If folks were to leave, retire, transition out, we wanted a resource that would live on and memorialize all of the work that has been done to date and where we're heading in the future. It also identifies potential adaptation measures at the asset level. I'll show some screenshots of that as well. And the goal of this really is to have information ready and on hand if grant funding comes available, if a project comes online that this asset is already flagged as being vulnerable. We have things in line and ready to speak with project engineers, design teams, anybody working on the project, of incorporating resilient measures into a project. And they range anywhere from short-term minor improvements to major, potentially standalone projects. We have that. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you slide back? I'm almost finished on this one. Resiliency data, as I mentioned, we have that at the asset level for all of our modes at MTA. And we also provide a little bit of overview in the toolbox of potential funding opportunities, grants. Right now, we have a more robust section built in there for the FEMA grants. MTA has pursued BRIC and HMGP grants. So the goal of that in the toolbox is to help others maybe not familiar with the grant process to understand it. And this is especially important when we're talking to project teams or engineers and understanding grant life cycles and how long that process can take. Also, personnel education. You know, in the environmental folks, we live and breathe this, but we also understand that we have to be able to communicate complex, you know, resiliency data, all of that in a way that all MTA personnel can understand and hopefully implement as part of their everyday activities. And again, we want to make this a repeatable process or application for peer agencies who would also like to implement something similar. So our approach was to create the Adaptation and Resiliency Toolbox. We call it ART Toolbox for short. There is a web link on the screen, resilientm.mta. This is our public-facing toolbox. It's more educational. It does not get down to the asset level on the public viewing version, just because some of that information is MTA specific and it stays for internal personnel. So we have two versions of the toolbox. The public-facing, which is the link you see here, as well as one that can be utilized by internal MTA personnel. Next slide. And how is and will be further utilized at MTA is we have the vulnerable assets identified per mode and division, why each asset is vulnerable. So we explain that you know, certain assets might be vulnerable to sea level rise, hurricane storm surge, things like that. And if there's multiple hazards affecting that asset, potential adaptation and resiliency measures that may be applicable at that asset, data background information required for grants. So we have fact sheets included in there that can be included in project information for additional support documentation of these adaptation measures. and next steps. So we highlight in there high level of if you were to move forward with this adaptation measure, are there permitting considerations, funding, things like that. So we provide a high level overview of what the potential next steps would be to implement this adaptation measure. Next slide. The toolbox has steps to resilience. So we explain how we are addressing resiliency, and it follows the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. We have all of our tools included in the ART toolbox. We also have a section that continues to grow on equity and resiliency, which has links to all of the state tools, like the MDE, EJ Mapper tool. We have some internal MTA tools as well that helps us flag for equity when considering resiliency. So we're continuing to build that section out and ensuring that all work we do at MTA, projects and resiliency-based efforts, are completed in an equitable lens. We have a case studies GIS mapper embedded into the toolbox. So users can click on a ping on the map and see where we have completed our resiliency projects or where ones are ongoing. Currently, we do not have future projects flagged on there. It's just past and current, but we look to continue to build out that hub on the toolbox as we move forward. And library of various documents, resources that are applicable, and some general FAQs for people who want to learn more about why we're doing what we're doing, how vulnerable are our assets, high-level understanding of resiliency planning at the agency. Next slide. Okay. This shows some screenshots of the toolbox itself. So as I mentioned, it has various tools embedded into the toolbox. We have an asset navigation tool. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you can select your mode of division, and then it'll nail down further to a particular station that is vulnerable and adaptation measures that could be applicable at that station, for example. You can also search if you don't want to by mode and just wanted to peruse what type of adaptation measures are included in the toolbox. We have a resiliency search tool that breaks it down for long, mid, and short term. Again, meaning short term, things like, increased maintenance activities, culvert cleanings, things like that, all the way to long-term solutions such as, asset relocation or raising an asset, things like that, that require much more time, money, and resources to complete. As I mentioned, we have the vulnerability mapping tool, which shows all of our past and current projects and the other sources that I mentioned. I apologize. The vulnerability mapping tool shows the resources of the assets with the data layers of all of the climatic data we're reviewing to determine our vulnerability. The case studies GIS tool shows our current and past projects. So we actually have 2 GIS tools embedded into the toolbox. Okay, next slide. So this just tries to show a little bit of how the toolbox walks through and nailing down to that asset level. So again, if you were to click on Metro, and you could see which one of the assets we have identified from Metro that are vulnerable. Say I clicked on stations, which is highlighted in yellow. In the MTA version, at this point, you would see the Metro stations, if they're vulnerable, very high or high risk, and then potential adaptation measures that can be employed at that location. Slide. And just to highlight a success story, as I mentioned, MTA has pursued FEMA grant funding for standalone resiliency project implementation. We were successful, and this is currently ongoing. We have a Metro tunnel pumping and dewatering study going on with 30% design. You can go to the next slide. I'll walk through how the toolbox supported this successful grant application. So as you can see, we've included it now that it's active on our case study. So that's a screenshot of what our case studies GIS mapper looks like. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. I must have taken a slide out. We also use the vulnerability mapper. Obviously, we had our fact sheets that had information on pumping. We utilized so many different tools in the toolbox to prepare that application, including all of the supporting documentation required for the application. Next slide. And as with anything, with successes, there are also challenges. We have obviously competitive state funding. So a lot of this effort is handled internally right now through internal MTA personnel. We did contract a consulting firm to help us do a national best practice search and interviews with various transit agencies across the country in that initial inception of the adaptation measures, just to get a finger on the pulse of what other agencies were doing across the country, what worked, what didn't work, what would be applicable here in Maryland, and build out our library of adaptation measures that way. But beyond that, all efforts were done internal. And again, part of that was deliberate in that we wanted to create a tool that is repeatable and using in-house staff, or if somebody can create a website, you can create this toolbox. We weren't trying to make anything proprietary or unique. We wanted this to be something that could be utilized by multiple agencies. Getting internal agency buy-in. Right now, the tool is primarily used with the environmental folks when we're looking at grant applications or involved in a project. Our goal this year and beyond is to increase awareness of the toolbox within the agency. We're also obviously doing external outreach as well, such as today presenting at this meeting. But getting the word out there that this tool is available to use, and changing the organizational culture of MTA of understanding that this is something we need to incorporate at the project level and program level. And lastly, evolving science, evolving toolbox. The tool is only going to be effective or most effective if it's up to date. It can't be a snapshot of 2023, 2022 when it was originally created. It needs to evolve based on the best science out there, data, what other agencies are doing. So there is a effort to make sure it stays fresh and up to date on a semi-annual basis. We go in and review it and update as needed. Next slide. So thank you for allowing MTA to come in. I apologize, Lauren Molesworth. She is manager environmental group. She got pulled away to another meeting, but she wish she could be here. So if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me or Lauren, my manager, and we'd be happy to walk you through the toolbox and go into a little bit further of the elements of it. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Jen. Anybody have any questions for Jen? Any follow-up? If not, we'll move on to our transportation land use grant recommendations. All right, we'll move on to number 5. Keith, can you present an overview of the recommendations on the round 2 of the TLC grant program?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So as Dan said, I'll be giving a brief update on the round 2 of the Transportation and Land Use Connections, or TLC program. Next slide. So the purpose of this program is to assist local governments in the Baltimore region with short-term assistance in planning and preliminary engineering for projects that would implement changes to the built environment and that would help to reduce traffic and make it easier for people to walk, bike, or use transit in the areas. In round 2, we've received 4 different applications from 4 different entities. one from Anne Arundel County, one from Baltimore County, one from Carroll County, and one from Queen Anne's County. The total amount that we have allocated for this program for this round is $300,000. So the first project that we received an application for was in Anne Arundel County. It was a study a planning study for the feasibility of new paths and sidewalks in the Brooklyn Park area. This request is consistent with and a continuation of a priority that was laid out in the Brooklyn Park neighborhood transportation study. Brooklyn Park is one of 3 designated sustainable communities in Anne Arundel County. And the county is seeking $100,000 for consultant services, with a total cost of the project, including committed staff time and resources, of $250,000. So this is just I know this is tough to see, but this map basically just shows a list of the existing entities that the study would like to look at providing connections to, things such as Brooklyn Park Middle School or MTA bus stops. It shows where some of the gaps in the sidewalk currently exist and that they would like to make those connections. Next slide, yep. And this is a snapshot of the Brooklyn Park neighborhood transportation study that shows priority 4, which identifies the feasibility of building the new paths to parks, schools, and retail. Next slide. So the second project that we looked at is a Finksburg bicycle pedestrian feasibility study in the town of Finksburg in Carroll County. This is also designated as a sustainable community. This study would result in the development of a guiding document that will help to update a variety of plans, such as the Finksburg Corridor Plan, the County Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. And the Finksburg Corridor Plan prioritizes bicycle and pedestrian circulation between neighborhoods. Right now in Finksburg, sidewalks are very limited. So this plan would assist in identifying new locations to add sidewalks or paths. The county is requesting $80,000 in consultant services, and the city and the county have committed staff time to complete this project. And this is just a snapshot of the sustainable community boundary. And as you can see, Maryland 91 and Maryland 140, maybe you can't see it, it's kind of small, but they kind of bisect this Finksburg area. So trying to make connections with those 2 major routes is vital to this project. Next slide. So the next project that we received is in Queen Anne's County, and it's the Cross County Connector Trail. This project will look at the feasibility of extending the existing trail 1.5 to 2 miles, and also investigate the possibility of additional trail spurs to connect to Main Street in Graysonville. The existing trail provides connections to schools, libraries, parks, and other local businesses such as restaurants and employment centers. And the extensions to Main Street would just increase those opportunities and to be able to utilize those resources. The request from Queen Anne's County is for $80,000 for a planning study. And similar to the other projects, the county is committed to providing staff time as their local match. These next 2 slides are just kind of some potential routes for the extension of the existing trail. So you can kind of just see where they may be looking at trying to make those extensions and the connection to Graysonville. So next slide. So I purposely didn't provide slides for Baltimore County, and I'll let you know briefly in a minute why we did that. So for our recommendations, BMC staff evaluated all 4 applications, and this is our recommendation would be to work with Anne Arundel County and the consultant support team to develop a scope and schedule for the Brooklyn Park area project and fund $80,000 for that project. We'd also recommend working with Carroll County and the consultant team to refine that scope and schedule for up to $80,000 for the Finksburg project. And finally, work with Queen Anne's County and the consultant team to refine their scope for up to $80,000 for the Cross County Connector Trail. Sorry, there's a spelling mistake there. I should have said Cross County Connector, not Finksburg project. And finally, the Baltimore County, as I mentioned, we aren't recommending to include this project as part of the TLC program. Baltimore BMC has an upcoming microtransit project that this Baltimore County application kind of fits right into. So our goal is to include elements of the Baltimore County application into the upcoming microtransit project that BMC is going to be working on. So we're not recommending funding this through the TLC program, but we are recommending that it be considered as part of the microtransit project. All three of the projects that we are recommending to be funded under the TLC program did receive very high scores from the staff. And we all agree that these projects should be moved forward. So therefore, we are asking for technical committee approval to send these recommendations to BRTB for their approval. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about these projects. And some of the sponsors are online here too. So if there's any specific questions about these projects, you might be able to ask them as well.
With that, Mr. Chair, we ask for the technical committee to approve the recommendations for the second round of the Transportation Land Use Connection Grant.
All right, we're not gonna do a roll call vote, just
I think you could do just by asking if there's any opposed to the recommendations, that type of thing.
okay. All right, so Todd asked it. Anybody opposed to these recommendations? Any comments or questions?
No.
Nope.
There's one no, there's no's, okay.
Because silent is not
motion for
answer,
approval
so.
or?
No, I think we're not gonna do a motion for approval, just looking to see if we've got any issues for moving this forward, since there's no resolution item, but we'll have to come back, of course, with that draft resolution. Is that correct, Todd? And then go to the board probably April?
Actually, there's no resolution required to approve just these recommendations. So we're just asking the tech committee for basically unanimous consent to move forward with these proposals. Guess going once, going twice, hearing nothing, we will move forward with these three recommendations, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Todd. Okay, we're gonna move on to item number 6 today. UPW activities, and Zach Kaufman's going to preview the schedule for the next long-range plan and also provide an introduction of the anticipated scenario plan task.
Yes, good morning.
Morning, Zach.
Is that up? Okay, so sorry, I'm having a little trouble. There we go. All right. So as Dan said, I'm going to be previewing an upcoming task associated with the 2027 LRTP, focusing on a scenario planning exercise, as well as a preview of the draft LRTP schedule for the 2027 LRTP. So you're all familiar with the LRTP for the Region Resilience 2050. We update the LRTP every 4 years, and it lists major roadway, transit, bike ped projects for the next 20 plus years that are anticipated to use federal funding. So you all work with the BRTB to determine the best investment approach for the long range plan, making sure that we're making progress towards regional transportation goals listed here, as well as addressing future needs and conditions. So in a normal process, we evaluate candidate projects based on local needs and priorities. We apply technical evaluation criteria that focus on the regional goals to score projects, and then select a preferred alternative of projects that meets those needs and criteria. We then run the travel demand model on projects based on population and job growth projections through 2050, in this case for Resilience 2050. So how many people will there be, how many jobs, how many households, where will they locate, and how might that affect travel in the region, where people will travel and how they'll get there. We also do a variety of analyses like air quality conformity, environmental justice analysis of impacts on low income and minority populations, as well as environmental identification of environmental mitigation measures. So a question remains, this is essentially just one scenario. So in addressing future needs, should we be considering other critical factors besides that one scenario of population and employment projections, projects in the preferred alternative, and model predictions? There are a lot of other forces shaping transportation, socio-demographic, technological, environmental, and it could be important to think about the outcomes of these forces, how they might impact our regional goals, and how they might impact transportation equity in the region. So this is where scenario planning comes in, and essentially it helps to expand our thinking about multiple possible futures to help us make more informed decisions. And there are a lot of different variables that can be considered. In scenario planning language, the process can be normative, meaning you're considering variables that will help you to reach a specific target, such as X number of housing units built in 10 years. In a long-range planning context where you're looking 20, 25 years in the future, it can also be more exploratory where you're seeking to kind of navigate uncertainty amid a lot of different driving forces of change. So you can look at external factors that we might not have as much control over: technological implementation, the pace of technological innovation, environmental patterns, macroeconomic conditions. You could also look at policy choices, land use, infrastructure investments, transportation funding mechanisms. Also, the interplay between these things, and ultimately it can be useful in scenario planning to identify strategies or policy options that kind of best hold up across a spectrum of possible future conditions. So some predictions may be easier, some are harder as we look further and further into the future. I don't really think that any of us think we can predict 2050. So the goal here is to focus on preparing for the future rather than predicting the future. Oh, that's just the Barry element. So in setting the stage, there are a lot of things to think about for scenario planning. What are our desired outcomes? Are we looking to educate ourselves and stakeholders on uncertainty? Are we seeking to identify a preferred combination of strategies that might help us achieve regional goals? Or are there some concrete policy and investment actions we can pursue? And I think it can likely be a combination of these things, probably the first two more than more concrete actions given the long range time frame of the exercise. When you look at who other MPOs involve, generally it's a pretty wide umbrella because it extends far beyond transportation. Obviously, BRTB and subcommittees, the Transportation Core, in our case, public input, as well as a variety of other subject matter experts from government, nonprofit, and community organizations. It's also important to identify the variables or driving forces that you're interested in exploring. These could be things like transportation policies or investment strategies. They could be land use scenarios, exploring distribution of population and employment. They could look at affordable housing or housing scenarios, exploring impacts of locating for forecasted growth in certain areas. Could look at technological implementation, market penetration of CAV. It could also look at variety of trends that changed during the pandemic, work from home, the use of commercial office space. There is an ongoing UPWP study on this topic that could help to inform our scenario planning exercise, and then a host of other demographic, economic, environmental uncertainties. So one example that I wanted to highlight, this is one possible scenario that came up during internal discussions from our regional housing coordinator, Dan Pontius, focused on housing and affordable housing. There's an increasing focus, although certainly not a new focus, on coordination of housing and transportation. Housing supply and affordability were also identified in the Comptroller's 2023 Maryland State of the Economy report that the BRTB had a presentation on last week as a key factor in Maryland's high cost of living and slowing economic growth. And these issues were top concerns at every roundtable discussion the Comptroller's office held across the state. So one idea could be to identify opportunity areas. These come from the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. They're communities with strong schools, low poverty, and access to employment. We could look at how these interact with areas with high walkability to transit and areas with jobs housing imbalances to explore locating higher proportions of forecasted growth in areas where these zones intersect, or building additional housing in these areas for households that currently commute into the Baltimore region, for example, from Pennsylvania. So just one possibility. Unsurprisingly, there are a lot of methods that are utilized for scenario planning. It can be quantitative. We have an in-house travel demand model that we utilize to analyze the potential impacts of transportation decisions. There are other modeling software available. I'll get into Vision Eval a little bit more in a couple slides, but this is a more simplified modeling environment that enables more rapid analysis. Generally, since not everything can be modeled and we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of different factors, there's a qualitative component. Scenario workshops are often held to design and to analyze scenarios, along with focus groups and surveys as well. DVRPC in Philly serves as a good example. They have a futures group, which is composed of a lot of different subject matter experts that come together to identify driving forces in the Philly region. And then they conduct exploratory scenario planning every 4 years. Regardless of the methods chosen, this is a complicated task. It's, you're dealing with a lot of different issues. So it's key to develop interactive tools and graphics that are effectively communicating the potential trade-offs to people involved, so that we're being, transparent and that people are given something that they can understand. So I just wanted to quickly highlight a few examples from other MPOs that could inform our effort. So DVRPC in Philly, I've already mentioned their futures group, use largely qualitative methods for exploratory scenario planning, where they identified over 100 forces. That list was consolidated to 18 forces of focus, and then they mapped them on axes of uncertainty and impact, and they focused only on the high uncertainty, high impact forces. And they kind of fell into 3 categories of technology, socioeconomic issues surrounding inequality, housing, and location, and then environment. And so they put climate change and equity on one axis and said, that could be largely market-driven, or it could be more politically informed and informed by collective action. And then they looked at technological implementation being incremental or transformative. And based on where you fell within that matrix, that 2x2 matrix, they designed scenarios and potential implications of each scenario. The Northern Virginia Transportation Authority explored a set of plausible scenarios based on their goals and core values. They also used TPB's travel demand model. So the goals and objectives are here, but the scenarios that they used for travel demand modeling focused on post-pandemic new normal, related on modifying work, delivery, and non-motorized trips. Technological scenario focused on market penetration for CAV and EVs, along with assumptions about operating costs, roadway capacity, and some trip making. And finally, an incentives and pricing scenario that looked at free transit, shifting travel times, VMT pricing, and parking costs. So they modeled these scenarios in isolation, as well as collectively to see what the impacts might be for performance measures. So ARC in Atlanta conducted a pretty interesting exercise that we're currently looking into with a software called Vision Eval to understand impacts on climate change and air quality. And they kind of started from a position of, the extreme uncertainty of looking 10, 20, 30 years in the future and the complexity of that task. So we do have an in-house travel demand model, but it's complex. It takes a long time to run, approximately 4 days, I believe. So you can imagine if we had, say, even a fairly limited number of things like 4 or 5 variables, if we wanted to model each of those and all of them kind of in various combinations, you quickly start to run out of time, or it takes a very long time to do all those model runs. So Vision Eval is open source. It was developed, I believe, by Oregon DOT, and it enables much more rapid analysis of many more combinations of variables than would be possible with our travel demand model. So this is just an example of some of those variables you can play with: population, employment, road capacity, transit service, and you can run those in isolation or various combinations of those and quickly have a distribution of impacts for hundreds of different scenarios. All right, so we have scenarios, we have methods. What is important to us and how do we want to evaluate those scenarios? The LRTP regional goals are likely a good place to start for identifying those metrics, but there are a lot of different metrics used by MPOs. I don't think there's anything surprising here, but access to jobs and other key destinations, transit ridership, non-auto mode share, congestion, emissions, and exposure to environmental hazards, climate resilience, lots of different things to use to evaluate scenarios. It's also important to emphasize the potential impacts on vulnerable populations in the Baltimore region. Scenario planning exercise centered on equity was a key recommendation from the 2023 equity scan. So as part of that, we should, discuss what does equity mean for the region and for this exercise, and what populations do we want to focus on? And then how do we identify strategies and scenarios that can advance equitable outcomes that work well under a variety of conditions or scenarios? All right, so this has been a largely introductory presentation to pose kind of some of these key questions that we'll need to consider as we work with you to develop an RFP and scope for this project, starting with something as basic as what are our goals and objectives? What are we interested in exploring? What methods? How will we evaluate scenarios? And how can we use this exercise to improve transportation equity? And, based on findings, how are there steps that we can take to prepare for the future? It could inform LRTP goals and strategies slated for next year, project evaluation, or are there scenarios or policies that merit further study? All right, so for us, for what's next, there is 250,000 in the budget that's currently out for public comment. We are hoping to develop and release an RFP fairly early in the new fiscal year. So in July. So for us, we're continuing to read and research work by other MPOs. I'm happy to share any of that work or some of the things that we've been considering. We'll continue to discuss and refine recommendations. We're beginning to meet weekly to discuss this exercise. And this has largely been introductory, but we're going to need continued committee input on the RFP scope. This was a high interest item for both the BRTB and the TC when we were talking about the fiscal 25 budget, and we want to make sure that it suits your needs and interests. So think about these key questions, discuss them with your BRTB member. We're also interested in hearing your experiences with scenario planning and what topics you'd like to explore. So you're going to be hearing from us again. We may have a separate work session on this RFP. But we wanted to get you thinking through introducing it. And finally, here's the LRTP draft schedule. So 4 years seems like a long time, and it is. But LRTP tasks kind of build on each other, and to use them effectively, we want to get information from this scenario planning exercise to inform later tasks in the LRTP. So we're planning both a transportation needs assessment and a scenario planning exercise for 24 and 25. That in turn can influence goals and strategies, as well as the project scoring methodology, largely in 25, though we are planning to develop a standalone bike ped scoring method that is also in the UPWP budget, and that would likely start in 2024. Work with MDOT to develop the state and federal financial forecasts. We also have started developing a local forecast in 25 into 26. CFG, the Cooperative Forecasting Group, will be developing a new set of forecasts through 2055 for households, population, and employment. And that all kind of leads up to project submittal, scoring development of a draft preferred alternative in 2026, analysis of that, and then ultimately a public review and a BRTB resolution in 2027 with public involvement throughout. So a lot to get done between now and 2027, but this is an overview of scenario planning and the schedule. That's all I have for you today. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you, Zach. A lot of thought going into the next long-range plan. I guess the needs assessment this year will be very important. So anybody have any comments or questions for Zach?
We are also beginning to look at surveys and various methods for the needs assessment, along with trying to put together questions largely centered around our LRTP goals for that needs assessment, but you can expect an RFP for that as well.
Okay, thanks. All right, hearing no other questions. Thank you, Zach. Look forward to working with you going forward. And we'll ask if there's any other business. Just to inform you, the next technical committee meeting will be in person on Tuesday, April 2nd. And so one last time, any other business to come before the committee today?
No business from staff, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Todd. All right, hearing no other business, we'll ask for a motion and a second to close the meeting.
Hartford County moves.
Hartford County moves to close.
Queen Anne's County will second.
Thank you, David. Queen Anne's County second. All right, that's close the meeting. We'll see you in April. And we've got some MDOT amendments coming to that meeting. I'm sure we'll have some other great presentations. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you very much.